Let's continue on with our covenants and talk about the 5 covenants that you need to know and understand in order to understand the Bible in its totality, understand the mode of operation of Yahweh and his promises and whether they are conditional and unconditional. If you have not yet listened to the study on covenants, then I will link that video card right here. Go listen to that because you're going to need to listen to understand that in order to understand this. So jumping right into the covenants between Yahweh and his people. First and foremost, we have the covenant between Yahweh and Noah. This can be found in Genesis 8:20 through 22, and then again, or continued in chapter 9, verse 1 through 17. We'll just read 8:20 through 22 right now. Then Noah built an altar to the Lord and took of every clean animal and every clean bird and offered burnt offerings on the altar. And the Lord smelled a soothing aroma. And the Lord said in his heart, I will never again curse the ground for man's sake, although the imagination of man's heart is evil from his youth, nor will I again destroy every living thing as I have done. While the earth remains, seed time and harvest, cold and heat, winter and summer, and day and night shall not cease. This is an unconditional promise by God, independent of what man does, which is the reason why we can see the Tower of Babel happen and God not destroy the earth again with water, just dispersing man across the lands. Okay, so this is essential to understand as the Bible story progresses, because we not only look at the way Yahweh operates, where he will make an unconditional covenant or promise with man, but also on how it plays out for when he does destroy the world with fire again later on and create a new heaven and new earth. Okay, so that's the first covenant we find inside the Bible. Now let's look at the Abrahamic covenant. The Abrahamic covenant can be found in Genesis chapter 12, 1 through 3, and then again in chapter 15, 17 to 22. We already read these covenants in the last covenant video, but this is where Yahweh, first in Genesis chapter 12, promises to make Abram a father of many nations. He tells him to come out of his country and go down to another land, and that he will bless all of the families of the earth through Abram. Then in Genesis chapter 15, we see the actual ceremony itself for Yahweh to actually pass or put Abram to sleep, pass through the sacrificed animals, and make his promises to Abram. This too is an unconditional covenant. There was nothing that Abram could do other than disagree and disobey for this to happen, right? So when he called them and Abram was counted righteous by believing in the Lord, from there on, Yahweh sealed his covenant after Genesis chapter 15, okay? The land was going to come, the descendants was going to come, the things, the prosperity was going to come, and then ultimately blessing all the nations of the earth through the descendant, which is Yeshua, right? So that is the second covenant. Again, it's an unconditional covenant. Remember, in covenants, we need 2 parties who agree, one of which, or if not both, is going to agree to not break the covenant should there be consequences that come to them. Now, in this covenant, again, it's unconditional on the part of Yahweh, so it was going to come to pass regardless of what Abraham did. Then we have the Mosaic covenant. This is a conditional covenant, a covenant made between Yahweh through Moses to the people of Israel, or the Israelites. Okay, we look at this in Exodus chapter 19, highlighting verses 3 through 6. So in Exodus 19, 3 through 6, and then Moses went up to God, and the Lord called to him from the mountain, saying, Thus you shall say to the house of Jacob and tell the children of Israel, You have seen what I did to the Egyptians and how I bore you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. Now therefore, if you will indeed obey my voice and keep my covenant, Then you shall be a special treasure to me above all the people, for all the earth is mine, and you shall be to me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. These are the words which you shall speak to the children of Israel. So this is Yahweh telling Moses what to go say to the people. It is conditional in nature. What you get is going to be based on your obedience. There are many, many promises inside the Bible that God has made to us. That is a if this, then that. He tells us what don't do, what not to do, what to do, and then what the outcome for each of those are, regardless of what your disposition is, whether you are kind of righteous by faith or you think you're a works salvation person. There is a law to be upheld, a standard to be upheld, and he tells us what the consequences for each are. We look at Deuteronomy 28:1. Now it shall come to pass, if you diligently obey the voice of the Lord your God, to observe carefully all his commandments, which I command you today, that the Lord your God will set you high above all nations. Again, conditional covenant for the Israelites. You must obey the Lord and his commandments. And we're going to get into the new covenant. Just stay patient with me. 28:9. The Lord will establish you as a holy people to himself. That word holy meaning to be separated, be able to tell the difference apart. Just as he has sworn to you, if you keep the commandments of the Lord your God and walk in his ways. Then he tells them what's going to happen if they don't. 28:15. But it shall come to pass, if you do not obey the voice of the Lord your God, to observe carefully all his commandments and his statutes, which I command you today, that all these curses will come upon you and overtake you. And then he gives them the list of curses that will happen if they do not obey. Okay, first he gave them the list of blessings if they do obey. Then he gave them a list of curses if they don't obey. And we finish out in 28, 45 and 47, 45 through 47. Moreover, all these curses shall come upon you and pursue you and overtake you until you are destroyed, because you did not obey the voice of the Lord your God, to keep his commandments and his statutes, which he commanded you. And they shall be upon you for a sign and a wonder, and on your descendants forever, because you did not serve the Lord your God with joy and gladness of heart for the abundance of everything. So he's saying you weren't happy. If you're not happy to serve me, if you're not happy to obey me, then here's what's going to happen to you when you don't. And that was the entirety of the blessings and the cursings as it pertains to the Old Testament. Then we get into the Levitical law to make sure that they can stay within the good graces of Yahweh. Now let's look at the Davidic covenant. We can find this in 2 Samuel chapter 7, verses 1 through 17. We'll highlight 12 through 16. When your days are fulfilled and you rest with your fathers, I will set up your seed after you, who will come from your body, and I will establish his kingdom. He shall build a house for my name, and I will establish a throne of his kingdom forever. I will be his father, and he shall be my son. If he commits iniquity, I will chasten him with the rod of men and with the blows of the sons of men. But my mercy shall not depart from him, as I took it from Saul, whom I removed from before you. And your house and your kingdom shall be established forever before you. Your throne shall be established forever. This is Nathan the prophet speaking to David according to what Yahweh instructed. So this is an unconditional covenant. He gives 3 promises here. He gives a promise that he will have a king directly descendant from beneath him. That king will build the house, and that king will build the house of Yahweh, who is Samuel. And then he says that I'm going to establish your seed's throne forever. So this is where the prophecy of the Messiah comes in, or one of the prophecies of the Messiah comes in, because that word seed can mean descendants and not just one born child, right? It can mean one born child, but it can mean descendants. So when we start talking about establishing a throne and a kingdom forever, we know that Solomon didn't live forever, right? Solomon did have an end. He wasn't even taken up like Enoch and Elijah, he had an end. So who is the forever? This is where the prophecy of the Messiah comes in, as far as the unconditional promise to establish David's kingdom forever, or his kingdom and his throne forever. So that is our fourth covenant. Now we have our fifth covenant, which is the new covenant. We've all heard of it. We all seen it. We find that first in Jeremiah 31, verses 31 through 34, where he says, "Behold, the days are coming, says the Lord, when I will make a new covenant with the house of Israel and with the house of Judah, not according to the covenant that I made with their fathers in the day that I took them by the hand and led them out of the land of Egypt, my covenant which they broke, though I was a husband to them, says the Lord. But this is the covenant that I will make with the house of Israel after those days, says the Lord. I will put my law in their minds and write it on their hearts, and I will be their God, and it shall be my people. No more shall every man teach his neighbor, and every man his brother, saying, Know the Lord, for they shall all know me, from the least of them to the greatest of them, says the Lord. For I will forgive their iniquity, and their sin I will remember no more." So he is promising to now write his law, which was initially taught, and to write the knowing of his existence, the knowledge of his existence, onto people's minds and hearts. Meaning there's no more excuse to say, is there God, is there not God? That moral inclination to do well and to do good by God, that is God writing his law on your heart. That is the covenant that he is bringing to pass. So when was this fulfilled? We see in a few different passages in the New Testament where Yeshua spoke, in Luke 22 and 20, and then again in Matthew 26 and 28, both of these reference where he's telling his disciples at the Passover meal that this is my blood of the new covenant, which is shed for many for the remissions of sins. Okay? And again, this covenant now is very interesting. This covenant, I believe, is both unconditional in essence, conditional in practice. Yahweh was going to do it regardless of what man did or agreed or anything. But in order to be a part of it, in order to actually reap the fruits and the benefits of it, you have to now accept the grace, accept the grace that was given through the blood of Yeshua, and now follow him. He says, if you love me, you keep my commands. We look at Hebrews 8 through 10, and the author of Hebrews speaks about what the new covenant is and basically how to actually uphold it. There's much more nuance. We see the way Paul writes in Romans continuously, and there's much more nuance to this covenant that I think needs a whole separate video to actually dive into. So we're going to leave it there. Those are the 5 covenants. We have 3 unconditional covenants, 1 conditional, and then 1 that is unconditional in essence, conditional in practice, on how we actually live by it to prove that we are a part of it in order to reap the rewards of God's blessings and his promises that he's given us. So until next time, I hope this blesses you, and let's look to advance the kingdom in our lives and that of others.